What is going on, everybody? How you doing, Jay Randall?
Hello, Brian. Great to see you.
You're a little older nowadays.
Yeah, thanks.
Happy birthday, Jay.
Thank you, sir.
It's Jay's birthday, everybody. Everybody
Yes.
say happy birthday, Jay.
I can't hear anybody.
Yeah. Oh, man. We got a great guest this evening. We got Will Stewart from none other than Doomsday Tackle. So we're going to chat with Will tonight, get him up here in a second. They make some great plastic baits, rods, reels, all that kind of good stuff. They got a new rod releasing soon, things like that. So let's get Will in here. We'll start chatting with him. Will, welcome to the show, brother.
What's going on, guys? How you doing?
What's up?
Good, man. How you doing this evening?
I am doing good. How are you guys?
Just good, man. You should be awesome.
I have a problem with showing exuberant amounts of energy, so
It's all right, brother. It's all right. It's all right. Well, we're glad to have you, man. Looking forward to chatting with you about, yourself and your role in Doomsday and what Doomsday's got going on, man. So why don't you just give us a little background on you, like where you're from and how you got into the fishing industry and Doomsday Tackle, man.
it's a long story. I hope you're ready for it.
I'm ready, dude.
Hey, we got some time.
So I'm from Missouri.
Okay.
Was born and raised around the Lake of the Ozarks. Moved to the Kansas City area around third, fourth grade, then to St. Louis area around sophomore year in high school.
Okay.
So I've never not lived within at least a 10-minute drive from a pretty significant body of water. St. Louis area doesn't have very many big lakes, but my dad lived on like a 120-acre private lake.
Okay.
So you literally walk out the back door and jump in the boat, grab one or two rods, and go fish for an hour or two every single day.
Nice.
So yeah, I probably fished. I always fish for fun. I mean, bass fishing has always been my go-to thing. I guess today they would probably call it like ADHD or ADD or something like that. But crappie fishing, pan fishing, cat fishing never really interested me that much because I was, really, I didn't like to sit still, right? So with bass fishing, you're always casting. You have to go out and find the pattern. You have to make things happen for the most part. And so that's really what caused me to enjoy it. Probably I'd say I joined the Air Force out of my second year in college.
Okay.
And then in that, I got stationed over in Korea for the last 2 years of my enlistment. And then really enjoyed that. And so I ended up going back to Korea after I got out of the military, came back to the U.S., went back to Korea, started teaching English and stuff like that. Got married, and my mom was coming to Korea to visit me, my wife, and my oldest son had just been born, or my second son had just been born. She was coming to visit, and my wife wanted to buy her a traditional Korean dress because it's a cultural thing. And the dress shop happened to be across the street from a tackle shop called Bass Camp. And for people that don't know much about the Korean fishing industry, carp fishing makes up probably about 60%. So it's a lot like Europe and most parts in Asia. Carp fishing is kind of the big deal, and they kind of use like cane poles. I mean, they're very high tech cane poles. It's not just a bamboo rod with a string on the end, but it's that style of fishing, right? There's no reel. It's called tay fishing, or grand fishing is the translated term of it. But it's just a stick with a line. You throw it out there in the float, and that's how they do that. So that's what most of the fishing stores in Korea are. So this is the first time that I had seen a store with the title of bass, in the name.
Mm-hmm.
So as being a bass fisherman, I had kind of, I went over there to check it out, and the owner of the shop happened to be kind of like the, I guess you could call him this was in 2009. And so he was kind of the Kevin Van Dam of the Korean bass fishing world, right? I didn't know that at the time, but I happened to go in there, having been stationed over in Korea for 2 years and being married to a Korean lady. I could speak Korean. At the time, it probably wasn't that good. I'm a lot better now than I was then, but we were able to talk and stuff like that. And so I had fished a couple tournaments, back in the States, local, at the lake at my dad's house, they have it's called buddy bass fishing tournaments or whatever. And it's just a partner tournaments. But when I was doing that, I was probably fishing about 295 days a year. So, because literally it was right out the back door. You literally walk out, jump in the boat and go. But the guy in Korea, so I had fished like maybe 1 or 2 amateur tournaments in Korea. And so for people that don't know, Korea is probably in the entire world, if you were to go about the bass fishing industry, America is the largest, obviously, and then you have Japan. Well, Korea is probably an easy third as far as bass fishing is concerned.
Okay.
They have their own professional tour, they have amateur tours. Not only do they manufacture for probably 90% of all the brands here in America, but they also have their own domestic brands too, that are very popular. I mean, I won't necessarily go into the names of the factories because I might get myself in trouble, but iRod, Dobbins, Duckett, Arbo Garcia, Luz, everybody has factories in Korea. So
sure.
I ended up because that was the only bass shop, I had to get on a bus and ride on a bus for about 45 minutes to get to this guy's shop from where we live. And I just became good friends with him. I'd go over there all the time and ended up started kind of writing for kind of like a Bassmaster magazine or, US Bass type, it's the biggest publication in Korea it's called Lure and Fly. Because lure and fly fishing only makes up about 40% of the industry in Korea. And they were the biggest magazine. So I started writing articles on American techniques. So a lot of people think about Japan. It's very clear water, high pressure, that kind of thing. Lots of big fish. Korea is a little bit different. I would say that Korea's waters are probably a little bit more like you would say highland reservoirs in the Midwest.
Okay.
So stained, a lot of rocky points, that type of, old dammed up, rivers basically in farmland, right? That's the kind of stuff they have in Korea. So the patterns were very, very similar to what I had experienced, fishing 200 days a year in the Midwest, right? So in Missouri, Lake of the Ozarks and Lake Sherwood is the name of the lake that my dad lived at.
Okay.
And so I started writing articles about, American bass fishing techniques. So the Korean market really follows the Japanese trends very closely. So, all the brands like OSP and Jackal and Norries and stuff like that. But they wanted to kind of, that particular gentleman was sponsored by Pure Fishing, which makes up Arbo Garcia and Berkeley.
Okay.
And so they have, a lot of the stuff that was coming out of Pure Fishing from the US is all American style, right? It's not really Japanese style. So a lot of their products that they could get from the US didn't really fit their market or weren't as popular. And so Pure Fishing Korea asked me to kind of be, I got sponsored by them when I go to tournaments, I got a jersey and all that fun stuff. And I wrote articles for the magazine kind of telling about, American lures and American fishing techniques and how those could be applied. Like nobody had ever heard of a shaky head, right? I had introduced a shaky head to the country of Korea. Nobody fished a 10-inch worm, right? I mean, like basic things that you would totally, not even think about.
Use,
yeah. They had never heard about for them. It was all, drop shots, jig head wacky, stuff like that. So it was, they're not used to the American, power fishing style. Nobody really power fishes over there.
A lot of finesse.
Yeah, a lot of finesse, crankbaits, even top water. There's a lot of really cool techniques and things that they do that I'll get into later that maybe the American people might be able to pick up on and use here. But kind of go back to my story. So I started writing for them. I wrote for them for probably, in fish tournaments, started fishing pro-ams, ended up finishing 4th place in the Korea Open, which is kind of like the US Open here, where it's like it's not really attached to any of the specific trails, but it's kind of like a pro-am where you have an amateur and a pro in the boat but your individual weight. So I ended up getting 4th place on the amateur side in that.
Nice.
And so after about a year and a half of writing magazines and just doing videos and doing that kind of stuff, they really needed help on the bait side. And so they had Pure Fishing had just bought Sebile, and they needed some help on choosing what crankbaits they thought would do the best there. And I said, and they wanted to hire me part-time to kind of run and be in charge of the bait department. And I said, well, at the time I was teaching English in Korea. It's like, I don't really have the time to do it part-time, but if you want to hire me full-time, I said, I'll do that. And so, they talked about it. They had never hired a foreigner before, and, all of those issues, even though it's an American company, it's the American branch in Korea. Right. So,
sure.
So they hired me, and I ended up becoming the, product specialist for line and bait for the Korean market. And I want to say that was in 2012. So early 2012, late 2011. And I ended up, so in Asia, so Pure Fishing has different regions. You have Pure Fishing US, you have Pure Fishing Asia, you have Pure Fishing MEAE, which is like the Middle East and Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And then you have Pure Fishing Australia, and then Pure Fishing Russia.
Okay.
And so we would get together with the whole Asia region. So it was Korea, Japan, Thailand, China, Malaysia. I don't know if I'm leaving any out, but I think that's pretty much it. But we would meet together every year for like a kickoff party. We would have to do presentations. We'd have to talk about what bait and line. So I started to get to know, because the Korean office is very closely connected to the Japanese office, because we ended up, they would design the products and then we would end up selling them in Korea. I had to become very, close friends with the Japanese bait designer, started working with him. He knew I had a little bit of a graphic design background. So he kind of asked me to take a look at some of his drawings or mess with some of the logos that they were doing for, packaging and stuff like that. So I started seeing the 2D technical drawings for the baits. And I had dabbled in bait design myself, carve a blank out of a piece of wood and get some silicone and try to pour my own baits and do all that stuff. But that never worked out very well. But I do have a graphic design background. So I saw these 2D drawings that the factory is pulling out for their bait designs. And I said, these aren't that difficult. I could do that. And so in my spare time, I started, drawing some drawings and stuff like that. And started sending some, hey, what do you think of this, to the Japanese guy who's in charge of baits. And he's like, you might have something there. And so I worked with him, ended up getting promoted about 6 to 8 months after joining to the Berkeley brand business coordinator for all of Asia.
Oh, wow.
So I was in charge of all of the not the country manager, but the region manager met me at that meeting, and because they have that meeting in February every year. So it must have been in 2011 I started. But we went to that meeting. He met me, and because I was able to speak fluent English, I could speak Korean decently. I was able to communicate with the guys in the U.S. at Spirit Lake or in Columbia, South Carolina. I was able to talk with them and kind of bridge the cultural gap, right? So, the U.S., for their own reasons, they're large. They have a lot of resources, a lot of money. I mean, Berkeley, Arbu Garcia, Fenwick, Shakespeare, Fluger, some of those brands have kind of faded off in the most recent times, but it's probably the largest fishing tackle company in the United States, right? So,
Yeah.
They were very confident in their products, in the U.S.'s products, and they had a hard time understanding why the products that they were making, why we couldn't just take those as they were and sell them in Asia as they were. And the guys who had struggled with speaking with English fluently had a hard time expressing the differences, whereas how I kind of fit in and really ended up being a good, I think, value for that time period is I really helped that relationship between Asia and America to bond. And now you're seeing the U.S. start to launch a lot more Japanese shapes.
Yeah, there's been
and a lot of them I designed. So.
Yeah, there's been
that's
a
cool.
huge craze over the JDM stuff, like all the Japanese stuff like Kai-Tech and, all that good stuff, man. You're seeing more and more, I think, of that Chinese or, Asian market transferring over, to the States, which is cool to see. Because, I mean, that's the thing. I forget who we talked to somebody once, and they're like, I'm always 3 steps ahead of everybody in the States because I pay attention to what's going on over in Asia, the new techniques, the new baits, and all that. And then by the time they get them here, he's already been fishing them for a year or something like that. So it's kind of cool to see that stuff kind of transfer over. And it's interesting. Like I had no clue that, that Asian market had such a big bass scene. I always hear about, like you talked about, the carp, the catfish, and things like that. That's what I think about when I hear fishing over in that part of the world. And it's pretty cool to hear how that all kind of translates, man.
Yes, I mean as far as that's concerned, I mean, there's really the number of markets. If you can look at global, I mean, bass fishing in the United States is huge, right? It's like 70% of the market share. I mean, it's saltwater fishing is big and on the East Coast and the West Coast, but even then, it's not as big as bass fishing is on the East and the West Coast, right?
Sure.
So, where it's kind of the opposite there. So even in the lure and fly segments of the Japanese or Korean markets, that makes up 40% of the total market. But you also have inside of that lure and fly selection, you have inshore fishing, and fly fishing. And inshore fishing, saltwater fishing probably makes up, because these are island countries or peninsula countries like Florida, and they're made up of probably 60% saltwater fishing inside of that.
Mm-hmm.
So bass fishing is really, small for their whole entire market, but bass fishing in Japan and Korea, China is starting to get bigger. So I think like FLW even has, some,
Yeah.
If you guys ever, I don't know if you've ever been to one of the FLW, the older FLW, not the Forest Wood, but the second tier down championship. I can't remember what it's called right now. Costas. It was Costas at the time.
Yeah,
Costa Championship, right? Yeah. So the Costa Championship had an element along with it that was FLW International had their own tournament inside that Costa Championship. And so you get guys from South Africa, Korea, Mexico, China, and they would all come and they would all compete. Canada, they would all come in and they would compete. And the winner of that international tournament got to a spot at the Forest World Cup.
Oh, okay.
Forest Wood Cup, yeah. So, I think the South African guy who won it 2 or 3 years ago did fairly well in the Forest Wood Cup. I mean, he didn't place in like the top 10 or anything like that, but he did fairly well in that tournament. And I think he's here stateside now, trying to fish the FLW Tour, or what was the FLW Tour.
I think I know what you're talking about. I forget that guy's name.
And so, yeah, but Italy is very small. Their market is very small. Europe has hardly no bass fishing at all.
Right.
Italy and France, that's about it. And even then, that makes up a tiny margin of what they do over there. So for them, it's what we call pike, or what they call zander, and carp fishing. I mean, that's 99% saltwater fishing, carp fishing, and freshwater pike, right? So
yeah.
I mean, that's how the world goes. So a lot of times we get focused in down here, and you don't really get to see the whole
spectrum,
whole big picture. And I think that was one good thing about working for Berkeley, pure fishing on the international side, is you learn a lot of interesting things. So yeah, after about 6 to 8 months, I started designing baits. I mean, I could name drop some that Berkeley's just released in the last couple of years. I don't know their names for them, but the new rib shad that they came out with, the Zeiss tail, the what's that new craw bait they came out with last year? The pitching flipping bait. They changed the name, so it's hard to remember what they call them.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I'll have to look it up later, but
yeah.
Those are some of the ones I did here. But in Japan, I probably designed 12 bass fishing baits and probably another 16 to 18 saltwater baits.
That's crazy.
Some of those haven't come over. And so then after working there from 2012 to 2014, coming towards the end of 2014, early 2015, my wife wanted to come back to the States. The kids were kind of getting old enough to where they wanted to go to school. So, she wanted to go to school in America. So we came back. I had tried to get coordination. Got a little cop cars going on in the background. We had some, I had some context, obviously, knowing the guys in the U.S. They didn't really have a spot open at the time that I was coming back. So I talked to them about coming back and working for the U.S. side of pure fishing. And then my brother's wife's dad's friend had just started Doomsday Tackle Company.
Okay.
And so my brother's like, hey, these guys may need somebody with your product development skill set. So I was like, okay. So I called him up, went and meet with him down in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where the company was first located at. And all they had was the Doomsday Turtle. So have you guys ever heard of the Doomsday Turtle?
I've heard of it, yeah.
I actually have, yeah.
My audio's not working very good, but
you sound fine.
But yeah, so the Doomsday Turtle was there, and they that's all they had. So they wanted me to kind of build a brand out of it. So my first week on the job was ICAST 2016, I think.
Okay.
And they we got there. First week on the job, ICAST, trying to sell this turtle. Some distributors were walking down the aisle. My business partner threw one to him, and he said, "Hey, why don't you give this a shot?" And the guy was like, "Okay." And they kind of kept on walking, blew it off, and then about 5 minutes later, turn around, they come back, and they're like, "This might be something that Dick's Sporting Goods might like." And so we kind of started going. We went to that distributor show, and we came back, and started working some stuff, and so I started designing a few baits. First baits I did for Doomsday Tackle was the Roku, the Reaper 3.2, which Roku is kind of like our stick bait style bait,
Yeah.
and the Reaper is like a micro jig trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm gonna have to get the cable for this because I can't hear you now for some reason, but you can still hear me, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you good, man. We can hear you.
We could sign
Where's
to
the
you.
cable?
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be
Talk so much
limited.
stuff, like 2 seconds.
I only know bad sign language. I think.
Yeah.
Oh, the battery died or my computer checked out.
We'll let Will get situated here for a second. I'm gonna try pulling up some of these Doomsday baits.
That's
that
pretty
he's talking
crazy.
about.
You know, I never knew. I mean, I always knew about Japan, but I never knew about Korea.
Yeah. I think you hear a lot more about the Japan stuff than you do anything else, which is it's kind of cool. Like Will said, you know, you especially us in the States, we think bass fishing, all we think about is the United States. Like you don't think of areas like he's talking about, which is super cool and interesting to me, at least. I hope everybody else finds that, you know, just as interesting, because it's super cool stuff.
I still can't hear you right now.
It's fine. We'll just keep doing your thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I knew that, like, you know, the European market, obviously, you know, I'm pike guy, so I knew that, you know, one of their bass, you know, was pretty much like, well, it's carp for them, but I also knew pike was a huge market out there, and I've always wanted to go out there myself, but I never thought of, you know, it's funny because you just, I don't know, I guess you just get kind of ignorant to it,
Yeah.
you know, without
Yeah.
looking into it, because you just go, American bass. There can't be bass anywhere else, you know. And you know, and I was just looking up stuff while we were talking. I'm like, man, I'm seeing them in China. It's pretty crazy, you know.
Yeah.
And they got some big fish out there. And now I'm thinking, you know, they got some smallies out there. Like that'd be interesting. You know, I would think.
Yeah.
You know, without looking it up, with the power of the internet at my fingertips, some fingers a little lazy right now.
I think this is working. Yeah. So this is the Roku that Will was talking about. It's kind of like your, you know, wacky rigged worm.
Yeah.
You know, Texas rig.
Yeah, it looks cool.
Senko is like the
Senko,
common
yeah.
terminology, but like, you know, it's their typical 5-inch worm, which is super cool.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like I didn't realize Will was so influential.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these markets. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah, it's nuts, man. I think a lot of this stuff gets developed overseas before they come and hit stateside. I think a lot of companies are picking stuff up over there and then bringing it here. He was talking about the Reaper, right?
Yeah, we talked about a few of them.
I think he was talking about the Reaper. I'm going to pull this up too. Yeah, it's just interesting to see how that stuff kind of transfers over. You know, it's not something you think about, so to speak.
But I remember him talking about that turtle too. Like when I remember seeing that back in the, you know, a few years back, and I was like, that's an interesting take, because when you really think about it, I mean, bass are gobbling up anything that'll fit in their mouth anyway.
Yeah, this is the Reaper here. It's a nice chunk type craw imitation to throw on the back of any jig for sure. I know I got a bunch of those, and I'm sure Will's going to talk about it, but I've thrown a few of their Devastators as well, which are pretty cool. And
You could probably punch with this too, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know Will's still kind of figuring this out.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff though. They do a lot. I mean, I know, like, you know, Rodney loves a lot of their stuff.
I mean, who's Rodney?
I know, just some
Rodney
guy.
Rodney who? Rodney Hicks. That's a Devastator.
Is that his last name? I've never known his last name. I just
really.
This guy always says like hi to me. I'm like, hi. I don't know.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Like, I feel compelled to talk to him because he seems all right.
That's hilarious.
What's up, Rod?
Hey, Will. He can't hear us. I'm gonna boot him, and hopefully he comes back in. That might fix his problem. I'm gonna kick him out of the studio.
Having some StreamYard technical difficulties.
hopefully he figures that out and comes back in. Yeah, dude, it's interesting. Like, I don't know, man. I've never really thought about all that, overseas type stuff, except for, like I talked about, the Japanese stuff has become hugely popular. Megabass was the other one I was thinking about. Where you're seeing a lot of that stuff crossing over, and you're seeing a lot more companies that you actually think are American based, but they're made overseas, like Will was talking about. Kind of picking up on those bait styles, so to speak.
Yeah, kind of like Gamakatsu too, right?
Yeah, Gamakatsu. I mean, there's a ton of them out there.
I got some of their jerk baits. They work really well. I like they got the slow sinking jerk baits, but
yeah,
it's funny too. Like a lot of the Japanese baits are like kind of, and they kind of all have the same like eye structure. I want to stay PC, but they all they all kind of I don't know how else to say it. They're very distinct. But no, I mean good stuff coming out of there. But it would be interesting to see some of the Korean stuff like hit stateside.
Yeah.
Some more of the specialty items. But I think a lot of that stuff's on Amazon. When you're going through some of the, because I mean I've gotten some some more of the hard-bodied like swim bait type stuff, and a lot of that stuff is like the multi-jointed. I mean I know a lot of stuff's made in China, but I would imagine that it's got a lot of influence from Asia just in general.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, there's some really good stuff on here. Got some dead space when we're talking.
Yeah,
because we're all looking at stuff. But
trying to get Will back in here.
Like the little boy looks like something that a lot of people would be throwing.
Yeah, here I can pull some.
It's very Kai-techy. It's got that rib. You got some drop.
Yeah,
shot.
Swim bait.
Yeah, you got some the Lagging Dragon. There's a lot of good stuff on here. I think that Devastator would be a great punch-in.
Yeah, dude, that thing is pretty slick. I've thrown that a few times with like a tungsten weight pegged in front of it, and just kind of hopping it on the bottom. Worked super good.
Yeah, Chris is saying that. Chris Josh.
Yeah.
I don't want to jack up your name, Chris. Sorry. And by the way, thanks for the happy birthday. Yeah, you too, Duke. And yes, it's a fabulous neck beard. I didn't even shave today. I didn't even care. I was like, oh yeah, we're doing a podcast. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that thing looks cool.
Yeah, the little boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sweet, slick little swim bait, but that kind of kink in the center of it, I'm sure adds some action. Let's see if we got Will back.
I'm back.
You got us, Will?
There you go.
Right on, man.
For whatever reason, my computer literally dropped all sound cards, period.
Ooh.
So I don't
remember what we talked about right before you started?
But the funny thing was the mic was working fine. So was the camera.
Yeah, we could hear you loud and clear, man.
It was just my headphones. Whatever, it wouldn't send any output audio at all.
That's interesting.
Are you on the DSLR right now?
No, this is my phone. So
it's your phone.
Yeah,
it looks pretty decent, man.
Thanks.
He's gonna tell us it's the Apple phone next.
It is. iPhone 11.
The new and improved.
Yeah.
Very cool, man. Well, we were just kind of talking about some of the baits as you were getting logged back in here, man.
Fiddling around.
Yeah, we were. I think like where you left off was when you came back to the States, and then you just started with Doomsday.
Yeah, the Roku and the Reaper. I saw you guys kind of look those up on the on the thing, and so my philosophy when I was designing baits came from my time there in Asia, right? So we would. The interesting thing about the Korean market is they really like that Japanese style, that Japanese-esque type product, but they don't really want to pay Japanese prices for it, right?
Right.
This is true. That stuff is pretty pricey.
Expensive.
Well, yeah. So I mean, because their culture there is they want the highest quality possible. The dollar value kind of has a social status aspect to it, right? And so in Asia, social status is extremely, powerful cultural thing, and they don't buy a lot of it, right? So there's not a guy out there who's got, unless you're a professional fisherman or something like that. They don't have a guy. You don't have the average guy doesn't have 15 rods in his rod locker, or if he even has a bass boat at all, right? It's one or two, maybe 2-piece rods that he uses for multiple things, but those are going to be like $1,200 rods, right? So
yeah.
that's kind of their thing there. But with Korea, they like that same quality, but they don't want to pay those prices for it. They want more of American style price points, right? Like good qualities, $200-$300, stuff like that. So that was kind of my design technique. So for us, Japanese JDM type tackle is kind of a luxury thing here, but for them, that was our everyday competition, right? So it wasn't, Pure Fishing being the biggest bait brand in the United States, Berkeley being the biggest bait brand in the United States. Really only seeing competition from Strike King, whose products are, while different, very similar in design and application. It's our everyday competition was, Nori's, OSP, Jackal, all that high end stuff was our normal competition. So kind of tying back into why I was good for the Japanese market and the Korean market to be able to tell the US why the products that they had didn't work here. Is because, Zoom is a monster here, right? As far as like bass fishing soft plastics, probably the largest in the country. Zoom products don't even sell in Japan, right? You have these guys who are kind of into American tackle, and they'll buy it, but they don't even have their own distributor in Japan. It's not even called Zoom because I think there's a trademark in Japan on Zoom. It's called ZBC, right? So it's Zoom Bait Company, right? So that's the name of the brand of Zoom in Japan. Gary Yamamoto. In Japan, they don't think of Gary Yamamoto as a Japanese brand. That's an American brand, right? Because Gary Yamamoto lives in America. He fishes in America. He fished in America. In fact, the packaging color is completely different for the Japanese market design products and the American design products for even Gary Yamamoto. So the Japanese market is extremely picky. So attention to detail. So on a soft plastic, you have the flash, which is the leftover injection kind of skin that's around the seam of the bait, right? So bait can have zero flash. If it has any extra extrusion on the outsides, the customer won't buy it. I mean, look at a Kitech bait, right? And look at the outside edge of it.
Yeah.
There's no extra excess, right? It's clean all the way around. Not to knock them about this, and I've talked to them about it, and they know. They know very well that what I'm about to say. But go grab a bag of power bait, and look at the amount of extra, plastic that's around the seam of the bait.
Yeah.
The Japanese customers just don't like that. So, you gotta be really intentional with your detail.
Brian's trying to fix his lighting there.
We had an emergency warning for severe thunderstorms, so my phone kind of stopped for a second. But
in case you black out at one point.
Yeah.
Once power goes out, I'll have to get the generator. But I am Doomsday Tackle after all. I'm prepared for that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, you're prepared.
So they just have a really high standard. So my goal for Doomsday Tackle was, the turtle was great in its time, but it really only kind of appealed to, I I guess you could say kind of like the country angler. For instance, when we had the Doomsday Turtle, it was, I think the first time that I could really see that difference was at the Bassmaster Classic in Tulsa in 2016. I believe that's when it was. They, if the guy was wearing coveralls, he was buying 5 bags of turtles. If he was wearing a jersey, he was buying 5 bags of the Rokus and the Reapers, right? So there's a difference between that tournament angler mindset and the the guys that like to buy Shakespeare combos at Walmart. I mean, that's most people don't realize that, Pure Fishing is one of their highest revenue producing brands is Shakespeare. I mean, they are selling the snot out of cheap line and $25 combos. I mean, that's where the volume, is at, right? Arbor Garcia gets close and Berkeley gets close just because the cost difference in those brands. Everything in Arbor Garcia, I think the cheapest thing in Arbor Garcia is maybe $79 or something like that, right? So, yeah, I mean, my model for Doomsday was to try to get Japanese quality at an American price point, right? So it's a trend that's kind of started now. I think we were probably one of the first brands to do it domestically. But even inside the zipper bag, they have trays. I think Rage started doing it around the same time that we did. But you'll have inside the package, there's a tray that holds the bait in shape, so that when you pull that craw bait out of the package, you're not getting curled over stuff like that. Yeah, so that's one of the first things we did.
That's the turtle there. I was looking for one.
Yeah, the why we don't do that anymore is one of our partners who had designed that particular bait. Like I said, that was there before I got there. He kind of wanted to go in a different direction. We wanted to kind of go in a tournament focused mid to high end range, whereas he kind of wanted to focus on the other stuff. And so, yeah, we just said, hey, go ahead and so he's still doing his own thing. You can still get the turtle now. I think it's under a different name or something like that. But yeah, so we continue to focus on, tournament brands. And so within our first year, I don't even think we had been in business a full year, we ended up getting 700 pegs, 47 pegs in 700 Dick's Sporting Goods stores across the United States.
Oh, wow.
So we have, that's a big jump from a tiny little company to going to being in every Dick's store across the United States. A lot of pressure too. It probably wasn't the smartest idea to do at the time, because I just don't think that we were ready financially and logistically to handle that volume of business. But when you're an entrepreneur and you're excited about success, you kind of like, well, let's risk it, right? Let's jump in and take a chance. And for 2017, it was great. We had a great year. Not only did we get into Dick's Sporting Goods, but we got into Cabela's, Gander Mountain, Shields. You guys probably have Shields up your way.
Yeah, there's some south and west of us.
Yeah, I think Springfield. I think they got one Springfield.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it was a great year. But then we had some factory issues. So me coming from Asia, I know all of the Asian factories. And so it was just easy. Not only did I already have working relationships with all those factories, but it saves a lot of money on machine tooling. So people think that it's the labor that's really cheap from manufacturing in Asia, but it's really not. It's really the tooling.
Yeah.
So it costs about $10,000 ish, depending on the mold, to get a full production mold done here in the U.S. Well, over there it's $2,000, and if you buy $50,000 worth of product, they'll give you a $2,000 credit. So basically, you're getting it for free.
The mold for free. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really the major expense, right? Because I mean, you're buying the product. I mean, that's an expense too, but the mold is just kind of sitting out there and gets amortized across the entire lifespan of that product. So You know, it's really dependent on sorry, I got customers telling me. It was really, that's the problem with doing this on your phone, right?
Yeah.
They're like, stop giving away the secrets.
They had I forgot what I was talking about now. Factories, mold costs, development. Yeah. So you have these. We made to do when we worked overseas is we used all U.S. materials, right? So our plastisol comes from the U.S. Our
Okay.
dyes and coloring come from the U.S. I designed the baits in the U.S. They're really only. It's kind of like the Apple thing on the back of the phone, right? Designed by Apple, assembled in China, right?
So how do they feel about that, right? Like, do they kind of frown upon that because it's all U.S. materials and you're shipping them over there to be made, whereas, you know, they may feel they could supply just as good or better, or how does that work?
I mean, they really can't, right? So if you ever noticed, I'm getting real down into the details now, but if you ever smell a bait when it comes out of the bag and it kind of smells like hairspray, that's because they're using Chinese
plastic. Okay.
Right. But if you pull out a bait and it smells kind of like nothing, or maybe has a little bit of a sweet smell, that's because it's using American plasticizer and American heat stabilizer. So there's a heat stabilizer in the injection process.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a big difference, and then the colors too. If you get good dyes from the U.S., even if a bait is, say, watermelon red and another one is white, they don't bleed onto each other. But if you'll notice that if you get like a chartreuse bait and a white bait and you leave them sitting on top for each other, or a red bait and you pull them apart,
bleed over. Yeah,
they bleed over on each other. That's just the quality of the dye. And so I always kind of joked with the guys at Pure Fishing, and I told them they need to stop paying salaries and start charging tuition, because a lot. If you look in the industry at their major competition, I would say a good 75% of those people worked for them at one point in time. 13 Fishing, Lew's, right? These are all people who worked for, Berkeley Arbor, Garcia, Shakespeare, and moved out. Myself, as far as Doomsday is concerned, and moved out and started doing their own thing. So it really is, because there is no major in college for bait design, right? You can't go be a bait designer.
Sure.
It was kind of like studio engineering, 15 years ago, right? Yeah.
That's your $1 million idea, bro.
Yeah.
Bait designing 101.
Bait design
college
university.
classes.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, so I learned so much and so quick. I mean, if I have one talent, it's probably my ability to learn. So I'm one of those guys who can spend 15 hours on YouTube just following the rabbit trail down into absolute ridiculousness. I've always been that way. Even when I was a kid, I was probably 12, and my favorite show to watch was 2020. You guys remember 2020?
Yeah.
I don't know how many 12-year-olds watch 2020, but it was one of my things. So I'd always spout these facts of, well, I saw in 2020. It's kind of like the Wikipedia guys now, right? Like, well, Wikipedia says. Yeah. So I mean, that's just kind of my personality. So I always absorbed as much information from anybody as I could, as fastly as I could, and it's really helped. And so one of my other roles when working for, so not only was I the Berkeley Brand Business Corner for Asia, I was still the product manager for Korea locally, and I was also in charge of QC, so quality control with all the manufacturers.
Sure.
So not only did I get to experience the bait and the fishing line firsthand, right? So all of the fishing line came from Spirit Lake in Iowa, because there's very few factories in the world that make fluorocarbon and braided line.
Yeah.
Actually extrude it themselves, right? Other people will pull in the materials and do different things, but and so we got all of our line from Spirit Lake, from the Berkeley factory in Spirit Lake, and I was also in charge of all the QC. So, accessories, rods, I had to deal with the manufacturing process for all of those. So that's really how we got into, making rods and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm ready.
He's like, just, he's a different kind of Vanna.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is our 47. So not only did I learn the Japanese style, so the thing that makes our rods different, like a lot of people say, okay, you're a new company, you're a bait company. And actually there's a lot of stores that wouldn't carry our rods at first, because we were known as a bait company. We weren't popular as a rod company. So but the thing that makes ours different is in Japan, there is a patent on fishing guides, a local patent. So you can't use any other guides or any other reel seat than Fuji, or you'll be sued. So it's kind of like the chatterbait thing here in the US, right? So
yeah.
They have a patent on guides. So at any price point, whether it's $60 or $1,000, they all have Fuji guides. Whereas Fuji guides here in the US are something that kind of pops up on premium products, right? Like over a $200 price point, then you might get the high-end Fuji KR guides.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not the case. So you have to really learn how to make, high quality rod at a reasonable price point. So like with our rod, we have, I say it's a 30 or 40, 30 ton blank. And most companies, when they say a 40 ton, because all rods are kind of made similarly, right? There's no reinventing the wheel. People try, like carrot sticks when it first came out. People try to reinvent the wheel sometimes, and it doesn't go very well usually. Sometimes you'll get lucky. But so when a company says the rod is a 40-ton rod, that means that it's, from here to usually about where that first wrap is on the rod, that section will be 40 ton. And then as it goes up and up the rod, the tonnage will drop. And that's simply because the higher the tonnage of carbon fiber, the more stiff it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more brittle it becomes. So if you were to have a rod that was like 46 ton all the way to the tip, and we actually tried to do that once in Korea, and it did turn out very good. The tips will break off super easy. So yeah, but what we do is I do things a little bit differently, and we call our SMR Tech blanks. And what that means is it stands for like a superior mix ratio. So we have a spine of 40 ton that runs all the way to the tip. So the rod isn't 100% 40 ton here and 100% something else there and 100% something else there. It's a mixture that allows us to run a 40 ton spine, or what I like to call it is kind of like thinking of as a guitar string.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, it's not a solid spine. I mean, there's not a solid tube of graphite running through the middle of our rods, although that would be cool to play around with. But there is a 40 ton spine that runs all the way through. So you have a guitar string that has that center wire and all the other wires are wrapped around it. So that's kind of what we do. And so that 40 ton, what it does is it gives you extremely high sensitivity, but you have the strength of cheaper rods. So if you'll notice, it's the Shakespeare's, the $25 rods, and those rods don't break very often, right? Because a lot of those are composite. That's a mixture of fiberglass and graphite together. And then even like your Mojo Bass type rods, you might have a tip or something like break off, but you're never going to break one, down here. And that's because it's, 30 ton to 26 ton low modulus graphite. With that, you get good durability, but you lose sensitivity. And so what makes ours special, and the reason why at $150, it fishes like a $300 and $400 rod all day long. And that sounds like a marketing mumbo jumbo, but Game and Fish Magazine chose our spinning rods because that was the ones they tested. It's the same blank, same process as the best spinning rod at any price point for 2018, 2019. Huh. And the reason why is because, the balance point's good. It's really light. It's super durable. There's some videos out there, I think on our YouTube channel, where I'm boat flipping a full-size mannequin with our 7/8 flipping stick. So the mannequin weighs 40 pounds, and I'm up on the balcony in our old warehouse. And I literally, I reel down with braid, and I'm lifting this mannequin up in the air and swinging it left to right. Not too long ago on Instagram, I put out a video where I tried to do the same thing with one of our spinning rods and a 20-pound dumbbell. But the spinning reel that I was using, the drag wasn't heavy enough to lift the dumbbell off the ground. But the rod didn't break. The line did. I was using 30-pound braid and it snapped. But the drag didn't work out. So I'm gonna have to find like a saltwater reel and try to redo that test sometime. But yeah, I mean, our spinning rods are really the same. So you're getting, for that $150, you get Fuji KR concept guides. So a Fuji guide, the KR guide, that's their most expensive frame. It'll come in different materials like stainless steel, titanium, stuff like that. And it has an alkanite ring, and you can change the ring insert. You can go from their zirconium to SiC. We use alkanite, which is so in the ceramic range, it's the lowest. It's aluminum oxide ceramic mix. But I would say it's a mid-tier ring, but it's more reliable than the SiC rings. They tend to, the silicon carbide rings, if you ever noticed, you'll lose the insert will pop out of the guide fairly frequently. And that's just because of the size. So at a rod at this price point, we wanted it to be kind of like our Toyota Tercel or Toyota Corolla, right? It's a nice car, but it's not the most flashy, but it's reliable. Right?
Sure.
You can drive it till the wheels fall off, right? So that's kind of, for us, that's what this price point was. And you get the carbon fiber that we use. So all the components, just like with our baits, we're basically everything except for the bag is made in the United States or made from U.S. materials. All of our rods are made with Japanese materials. Because when it comes to carbon fiber, Japan is the best at making carbon fiber in the world, right? So as far as guides are concerned, there are a couple American companies that have, like American Tackle Company and some other people that have some decent guides, but Fuji it's the industry standard, right? So Fuji reel seats are the exact same. So we do all that stuff. We use, all of our stuff has, premium AAA cork, it's not pitty or anything like that. It's nice and sanded smooth. It does have some fillers in it, but all cork does. We don't use any rubber winding checks on the rod at all.
Okay.
So I'm about to get into more details here. Some people may find boring, but to me, this stuff is entertaining, right? So I like to talk about the details. So if you think about your fishing rod as being, like I said, a guitar string, right? So anytime that rod moves, it moves not just the tip, but that vibration runs up and down the rod, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So in Japan, they actually have machines where they'll actually attach the bare blank at the backside, and it'll be suspended in midair, so nothing's touching it, kind of like a free float barrel on an AR or something like that, right? And they'll test to see the percentage of vibrations that run down the rod. So if you go to Japan and you find a rod that has a hook keeper tied onto it, I'll buy it from you, because it doesn't happen. Because anything that you attach to this rod, whether it be a sticker, paint, sanding the blank or not sanding the blank, thread wrap, winding checks, and then the material will
Acts as a dampener, right?
Yeah. It reduces the amount of vibration that you can feel through the blank. Yeah. So with the concept guide spacing, a lot of people think that that's not important. So if you'll ever look at guides with a KR, so these are KR guides with the concept spacing. So what Fuji has done is they've actually put blanks in, and they've actually calculated. So if you think of sound waves as being a modular frequency, the guides are placed at the heights of that frequency. So you're not losing as much vibration from where the guides are placed on the blank itself.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so that's why we don't have a hook keeper. People ask us sometimes why we don't. First of all, me personally, I've rarely ever used one consistently. Maybe at the end of the day, I'll stick it in there or do whatever. But most of the time, I'm just dropping it on, reeling the bait up to the tip, throwing it on the deck of my boat, or I'm just using the guide, right? So
Sure.
we have double-footed. With other guides that aren't double-footed, you can't really do that. But you can place a hook right inside this double-footed guide, and you're not hurting the ring at all, right? You're attaching it to the legs. That doesn't hurt at all.
Let me ask a tech question.
Sure.
So,
oh boy.
Well, the more higher end rods usually have more eyes. As far as that goes, would the science that's built into that actually change the composite of the blank? And I'm speaking to what you just said in terms of, how the vibrations travel through the blank. And you were saying that there's, very specific placing of the eyes and how they're put on there, and even to the rise of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went with more eyes, even at the same length, would the material change within the blank, especially how it's wrapped, how you were saying, like as a guitar string? And would the eye material also change with that, that upgrade? Oh yeah. I just asked.
Yeah. So most of the time they do. A lot of the times you put more expensive components to raise the price, right? So retail value, most of the time, depending on the company, it really depends on the cost. So the company has a specific margin that they have to hit.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it costs this much. The margin has to be this much. That means the retail price has to be that much. And then if you have a big brand, it's like plus another 20-30% for our name power, right? But for as far as technically is concerned, that's why I just follow the Fuji. Why try to do something marketing special when the company who makes these guides has done robotic testing to find out? So the Fuji KR concept guide spacing system that Fuji's created will actually tell you, based on the length of the rod, not necessarily the material, how many guides should be on there and where, based on the length of the rod. So if our rod, we plan on coming out with probably next spring a higher model than this at around the $220 price point, that will have, Torzite and titanium frames and the new Fuji TSS real seat type stuff, PTS and TSS. So better components than what's on here, more of kind of like the sports car, where this is the reliable, sedan. And then after that, we'll probably come out with our, Jeep type sport utility vehicle that's at a lower price point, but real durable, something that you can whack against the truck and you don't have to worry about it breaking.
Well, I mean, and I was asking the question because I've always associated with more eyes on the rod to relieve the stress of the line running through the rods, because we've all used the Shakespeare rods where you got like 5 eyes, and you can see that there's clear there's angling on the line as when you're catching a fish, or well, I guess mostly when you're bringing in a fish, but then the more expensive rods you get more eyes, and it seems like the torque on the string is much more forgiving. And plus, I know that has a lot to do with the material that's actually in the eyes too. To make it to where you're not damaging the line by fishing through it.
Sure.
And I mean, that's how I thought of it, when I associate, because when I look at a rod, I go, oh, that one's got like 9 eyes. That must definitely be more expensive, which it almost usually is. And that's why I was asking the question initially.
The real reason is because the most expensive component on the rod is the guides. So literally, I can reduce the cost of this rod by probably $50 by removing 2 guides. And that's how, after you have all the increases from margins, right? But from the cost, remove 2 guides and I could bring down this price to $100, right? So that's probably the number one reason. We don't go with that. So this is a $150 rod that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Oh,
nine plus
quite a few.
9 plus tip, right? Is how they call it. And that's because that's what Fuji calls for. So regardless of how much it costs me, that's what Fuji calls for. So I save price. I really don't save a lot of price. I mean, we're a smaller brand, so our margins we don't have name power. So I don't have an extra 20, 30% cushion in there like everybody else does. But, and that's really, so, I mean, we won in 2016, 2017, was it 2017 maybe, when we first did this in the trade at a Pittman Creek wholesale show. We won best rod for that year when this first debuted, before it hit the market. And I had guys from other brands come over and tell me that I was giving them away. You're at that price with what that rod is, you're giving them away. And it's like, I'm not quite giving them away, but I'm glad that it upset you, right? So
I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And that reel seat's a Fuji reel seat, right?
Yeah, Fuji ECS. Fuji ECS is kind of like, it's the Goodyear of reel seats, right? Like it's your standard. I'm not a real big fan of the ACS, which is the one that came the generation after this, because it has those finger bumps here. And if your hand doesn't fit that exactly, so if you don't have an average Asian man size hands, it's uncomfortable, right? So the newest generation that came out like 2 years ago, that's a really good reel seat. The VSS and VTS reel seats, those are really good reel seats, and that's what we'll have. That's their high end now. But yeah, so like we have all aluminum winding checks. So
nice.
The place that marks the rod here. That's because if you have to put something on the rod, like you have to put something here, or you'll get damage to the cork, especially on cork rods. EVA is you can get away with not having winding checks as much. But you have to protect the edges of that. Otherwise it starts to crack all the way up and peel off. So there's some things that you have to do. But if you use materials to transmit vibration better.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah. You're not losing as much. You're still losing. And that's the same thing with the question, kind of like we asked for with the guides, right? So with an alkanite, with an aluminum oxide, this is braid ready. So it's not going to get torn up by the particulates that bind to the braid, and it's not the braid itself that cuts your guides. It's the sand and gravel and dirt and particulates in the water that get absorbed by the braid, and then they run through your kind of like sandpaper through your guides, and that's what'll cut up. So anything alkanite or higher is not going to damage the ring itself. Stuff other than that, or cheap, sometimes you can get it's silicone carbide, but it's not good quality. I mean, there's always a quality in the material that you have to worry about too. But like I said, Fuji is bases their stuff on quality. So it's just a company. It's a component company that I can trust, right? So Keegan, it's a Korean company. I actually know the owner. I've met him several times. They have good guides, but when they first started out, they had a lot of issues. They had a lot of issues with the quality of their SIC. Most of the SIC in the world is mined from Korea, so even the guys in China are buying the material to make the inserts themselves from Korea. So, yeah, I mean, we just try to make sure that everything, if you put a rubber winding check on a rod, that's going to absorb a lot of vibration compared to aluminum. The thread, we try to keep it to the minimum amount possible. A lot of times in this label section, where you have the sticker with the information, honestly, if I didn't have to put that on there, I would, but people tend to like to know what rod they're fishing. So I've kind of forced it.
Right.
But a lot of times you'll notice that the epoxy that runs from the reel seat winding check to that first wrap over here.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep going this way, but I have to pull it this way for you to see. That epoxy will cover that whole space. Mm-hmm. Ours stops here, it starts here, and then stops here. So it doesn't,
Yeah, I've seen that on a lot of rods.
We remove as much. I told them, I said, I don't want epoxy on the rod unless it has to be there. Like, I wanted to get rid of this whole wrap, but what it is there's a sticker, right? This print here is really kind of like a water transfer sticker. And if you don't wrap something at the end of it, it'll start to peel up, right?
Gotcha.
So like Arba Garcia, I think when they had that gray rod, the one above the Veritas, maybe the Villain or something like that, they had heat transferred graphics, but that's why they were solid white, right? You can't do multiple colors. And so they didn't have any epoxy. And that was really nice. I like the feel of that being completely slick and smooth. But if you want color graphics on there, you kind of have to go with, you can do black, you can do white, you can do solid gray, you can do solid red, but you can't do multiple colors unless it's a printed graphic that's, on there too. And I told them, I said, I don't want, I want a vinyl transfer label. I don't want a sticker that wraps all the way around and you can see a seam on the backside. Like, I don't.
Sure.
Minimal.
Yeah,
everything is minimal as far as removing the vibrations of the rod. I mean, even it's kind of hard to see it from back there, but even the back is aluminum.
Yeah.
Laser etched.
That's cool.
The nut cap there. Try to get the light. It's got DT-Co laser engraved into the aluminum. So I mean, we just put a lot of detail in it. Stuff that you don't normally find at 100. I mean, we're talking Mojo rod prices or stuff like that. But it's for any other brand. If you match the quality and stuff like that, it's a 250 rod all day long. But
yeah, I don't think people really realize. I mean, I never realized how much goes into making a fishing rod. I mean, obviously, I knew there was just the fact that there's carbon fiber involved, or even graphite, any of that stuff. I mean, those are all pretty complex materials to intertwine, especially if you got fiberglass involved too. But I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge, my friend.
Yeah,
you have a lot in that head of yours.
I am like I said, I like to absorb it. I'm a sponge for that kind of stuff, and it interests me, right? So that's what excites me. Yeah. It's probably the only thing that gets excited. You could hand me a check for $1 million, and I'm like, cool, thanks, and I'll go deposit it and spend it, right? Yeah. I'll be happy that I have it and spend it, but I'm not going to like flip out, right? It's like, I hated that I always forget things. This is what happens when you speak a foreign language for 15 years. But what's his name? The guy that won the Bassmaster Classic. That's a lot of people. But when he won, his face was very like bland and boring.
Oh yeah.
It has a real thick country accent. I think he's from like Louisiana or something like that. I don't remember his name. But anyway, when he won, everybody else were like, yeah, screaming, throwing it up. When he won, he was like, right, like that's me, right? Like that's
He's like, thanks. He's like, I don't know why it took this long. I'll see you.
Cliff Pace.
Yeah.
Cliff
I'm hungry. I'm going to get some food.
Yeah, that's right.
Cliff Pace was his name. Yeah. Yeah. So Cliff Pace was his name, right? So when he won that. So yeah, I mean, I don't. My wife gets mad at me all the time because she'll be like, "Hey, guess what?" And I'm like, "What?" Yeah. She'll tell me, I'm like, "Oh, that's great." Yeah. And she's like, "You don't care?" And I'm like, "No, I care. I mean, what do you want me to do?"
You sound like you're the proper person to be in the position that he's in, and you're like one of the quiet heroes. Dare I say it? behind the scenes that no one even knows,
Right.
and then to hear you say it like, yeah, it's like, I got like 6 or 8 things, 6 or 8 designs out there in Japan they're using even to today, and Berkeley's got some of my stuff, and and it's just like, whoa, really? I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool, dude. I mean, it's
that's when you should be like,
yeah. I mean, you definitely
good
got.
job,
I mean,
Will.
yeah, your resume in the fishing world is probably nuts. I mean, you definitely should be a sought after, kind of guy. Maybe for that $1 million,
I'd hope. Hey, I'd hope so.
But no,
Somebody wants to come buy Doomsday off me.
yeah. Oh,
I'll sell it to you.
I'm sure Doomsday's like, what?
No, my partners are probably like,
Yeah.
Finally,
the headache
yeah.
is going away.
No, I mean, and you guys are turning out great products. I mean, everything looks clean, and it's really cool to know that, that there's such attention to detail, and there's reasons behind that detail. And knowing what you're really trying to do with your product. I mean, that's, there's a lot to be said about that. I mean, it's definitely commendable.
Yeah, I mean, our baits are the exact same way too, right? Everybody talks about matching the hatch, and everybody's worried about color, and all of that is a bunch of marketing baloney. Okay, if you really, if you go to, I wish they would. I think there's a couple videos of their lab at Spirit Lake on YouTube that you might be able to go find. But they have a guy named Doc Jones, right? He's an actual doctor, and he was the person in charge of. He may have retired, I'm not sure, but he was the person who developed Gulp, developed Power Bait, all of that stuff. And they actually have this circular swimming pool with like horse stalls in the middle of it, where they put fish, and they have a robot that pulls that bait around the circle, and they go to see what actions, different things that cause the fish to strike. They have these, hydroflow tanks where they run water at different speeds through, and they'll suspend that crankbait or jerkbait. So when they're talking about science, I mean, they really do science, right? So like I said, they ought to charge tuition, because I learned a lot from being there. I learned a lot about how fish smell and how fish taste. So basically, fish taste and they taste. They taste through their nores, which is their nostrils, and they taste with their mouth. But what they're really looking for is amino acids and electrolytes. That's all they're tasting, right? They can't taste the difference between garlic and coffee and all of this other baloney. What they're tasting is the amino acids. So garlic has sodium in it, and so sodium is an electrolyte, and that's what the fish is sensing. So
that explains salt.
Yeah, so that's why salt works. Gary Yamamoto has scent, even though his baits aren't scented, right? You can't smell them, but if you taste them, you're gonna go drink a gallon of water, because your mouth is gonna be full of salt, right? So, and we do the same thing with our baits. And I went a step further. If you ever buy one of our baits and you roll it in your fingers and you see how fine the salt is, it's almost as fine as flour. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like that orange movie theater popcorn salt that you put on there. It's super fine, but super salty. So what that does for our plastics is it makes it more durable. So the thicker, the bigger, the larger salt that you put in the plastic. So the salt granules, crystals are floating around in the plasticell, and it's injected into the bait. And as it hardens up, that salt fills up gaps, and it basically turns that plastic into Swiss cheese. And that's why baits like Kitex and Gary Yamamoto's that have really thick, large granule salt in their baits, it's great. It gives it a lot of weight and a lot of action. But as that salt starts to dissolve, after you've thrown that bait in the water for about 35 minutes, that salt starts to absolve in the water, and it leaves, holes in the plastic. And that's why when you catch one fish, the bait breaks in half.
Right.
And you don't catch so many fish. So what I do is I put as much salt, if not more, in my plastics, but it's so fine that the size of the holes that are left inside the plastic don't, it's not as durable as a bait that doesn't have any salt in it.
Sure.
But it's far more durable than the baits that do have salt in it. And so literally we have our 5.4-inch Roku is what? Maybe 5 inches, 5.25 inches long. So not that much longer than a Senko, about
Sure.
half as thick, and weighs the same amount.
Huh.
And yet it's a lot more durable. You can literally yank on it and it's not going to, snap in half. So, it's not a one fish, one bait type of a deal like a lot of those Japanese brands are.
Yeah.
It's more of a 5 to 8 fish to one bait. Whereas you can get with baits that don't have any salt at all, you can catch 12, 13 fish on the same bait. And but you're not getting any, there's no scent, there's no action at all, right? So you have to have, in hydrodynamics, it's all based on weight and water displacement, right? So you have to think of water, things that move through the water, move like an airplane or things through the air. So that with aerodynamics, there's hydrodynamics. And a lot of people talk about matching the hatch. Well, what I try to do is I try to match the vibration, because bass feed 60% of the time through their lateral lines. They're not looking with their eyes. They're feeling water displacement around them. And a crawfish, as it moves through the water, displaces water a certain way, right? I mean, how many times do you see minnows or crawfish doing this in the wild, right? Never. So, yeah, it's tight, hard flutters. So a lot of our baits have, a fisherman looks at it and says, "Oh, it doesn't have any action." No, it does have a lot more action. It displaces water in a more realistic way. And so the fish bite on it. So, and you have to judge soft plastics by the hardest day of the year, right? So if the fish are biting, if the water temperature is warm, if you find a school of them, you can catch a bass on a cigarette butt, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Just throw it in there, bare hook. It's on the hardest days of the year when the bite is slow. You can throw it in front of a fish's face and they don't want anything to do with it. That's how you can tell if a bait's good or not. You can't tell by if you catch 15 in one day in the middle of summer when the water's 80 degrees and there's all sitting under your deck, your dock. I mean, that's just not how you do it.
That was like me yesterday. I was on a heavily pressured water. Fish were slamming these schools of shad that were cruising by. I couldn't buy a hit. I mean, there would be a mess. I mean, just after a boil, I'd throw the lure in there. They didn't want nothing to do with it. I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, it gets to the point where you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to do this, hoping a fish will jump in the boat.
Yeah. But in that boil, they're feeding on vibrations. And I bet if you were to find a bait that displaced water like those boiling fish were, you'd get bit.
Yeah.
So
Brian knows me. I suck at changing stuff up.
But I mean, and it has nothing to do with color, and especially in that kind of thing, because a bass, they don't have 20/20 eyesight, right? They're not looking at each individual fish in this ball. They're seeing, I mean, look at shad when they boil up at the surface. It's a big black cloud, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell where one starts and the other begins, right?
Yeah.
But what they're doing is they're sitting under that pod, and as one or two or a part of that, that's why you actually see, that's why they school, because what you'll do is you'll have one, and it's usually the one that's flying out of the water. They'll have one, it's just like sharks. They'll have one ram the school, and that'll disperse, one or two that'll pop off, and they can feel the ones and see the ones that are separate from that school, that ball. The reason why they ball up is being in that ball protects them, the shad. It protects the shad. The bass don't know who's what, where's what, when, right? So they'll run into this pod and try to burst the shad out into, get individuals to pop out, and then the other ones will come up and start, eating those. And they'll just keep doing that. And so, I mean, it's, that you have to think of it in a biological, scientific way. If you really want to be, I don't know. I get into this. This is kind of stuff that I like.
Gotcha. I missed a golden opportunity yesterday. That's all. Like I was like, how am I not catching fish? They're everywhere around me. Like, why?
Epically failed.
Man, it was just driving me nuts. I mean, I almost thought, and I went to the waters going, this is slam dunk. I got this.
Yeah.
I always catch a fish here, even when it sucks.
Yeah.
And I thought I was throwing a 10-inch worm even so, got a couple hits. But once the boil started, because we're in kayaks. We can see these fish coming right underneath us, just huge clouds. And then you just hear the noises of the bass, and then you're seeing it. And I'm just like, I just couldn't put it together. I was like, why is this not working? It was driving me nuts.
Yeah, for
Finally gave up. I'm like, I don't know.
So I have a question for you guys, though. Being in the kayak world, what are your guys' thoughts on kayak specific rods? Do you think there's a place for that, or is it just hype?
So
Hogwash.
yeah, I don't think it really exists. And the reason why I say it is this. I mean, you know, the first instinct I think any rod maker is going to have is to shorten the butt end. And what I've noticed is that if you are going to do that, and I haven't seen any, I mean, I don't know, Brian may have a different, view on this, but I have not experienced a rod that is worthy of doing that with, where you're not losing the balance. Like what I've always noticed is that these rods are always so forward heavy. It's uncomfortable and it starts tweaking your wrist after a while. And then you can't really get that action. And then you find yourself going right back to these
regular
longer
rods.
Now I'll say this too. We're sitting down.
Yeah. So you're up, right?
So
that tip heavy is really pulling on your.
Yeah. But if you're like a bigger dude, like, I mean, I am, if I'm wearing a regular PFD, sometimes that bigger butt end is going to interfere with my freaking stomach. You know, I mean, it's like, with the extra girth I put on with the PFD. So, I mean, some people have gotten used to it. I have a couple rods like that. And I know Brian's had some too. I don't agree with that path. Unless you can really perfect that balance, I don't think it's possible. And I think it's kind of just a dumb gimmick.
I think it's just a huge gimmick to the kayak market. It's I've never had an issue with a butt end getting in my way. I mean, I think it depends too on posture, on the way you sit in your seat and things like that. But I've never had an issue with it. And, I've tried a couple. One of them was with a rod company I used to work with. And somebody gave me one of those Mojo Bass ones, the kayak Mojo Bass rod or something.
I don't like
to try
those
out. And I was like, you can take this and shove it where the sun don't shine.
Yeah,
like,
sorry, St. Croix, but I mean, I know people love them.
Yeah. I mean, I know some guys that and gals that do, appreciate that style setup. But I think, like Jay said, is it totally throws off the balance of the rod.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
And when you're throwing off that balance, you're losing some sensitivity, I feel, and you're going to miss some hookups. Like,
even to sorry to keep slamming St. Croix, but their Mojo Bass rod,
you're not. You're not.
I mean, I don't know. Like, well, I know Tanner loves them. I mean, sorry, Tanner. Yeah. But I mean, it's like their one finesse rod. I'm like, how is this a finesse rod? It doesn't. It feels like a freaking stick, and it's like front heavy. Like I just don't. I just didn't get it. But again, people will scoff. I like using carbon lights.
Yeah.
Because I beat the crap out of stuff, and I don't want to have to, spend a ton of money to replace it. But at the same rate, it's still pretty tough. Carbon lights don't break that often, and I'm not like a complete moron with them. I mean, but in the kayak world, you're laying stuff at your feet every
dropping
now and
in
then.
the lake.
Yeah.
Well, I think too. We have so many friends that have broken rods, and I think that breaks down to we went on a roller coaster ride with Will.
I was like, did Will just do a backflip?
Yeah, I did.
I think it breaks down into cheap blank, and two, when you're in a boat, you're never really high sticking a rod. In a kayak, because you're sitting so low to the water and you're trying to bring that fish to your kayak, a lot of guys high stick those rods, and then that fish goes to dig or flop or something like that. And that's when the top portion of your rod, not just the tip, I've seen it break, 2-3 guides down, that's when that breaks. And I think it's just because guys are not reeling in enough line, and they're high sticking that rod so high that when any kind of pressure gets pulled straight down on that rod, it's snapping that rod blank. Whereas I think some of those guys and gals that have switched over to the quote unquote kayak rod, you're getting a little bit more leverage out of that rod with a shorter butt without going to the high stick, if that makes sense.
And to
Yeah,
add
so
to that, a lot of us are side setters.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not really, you know, you're not standing up, you're sitting. You do like more of a side sweep.
Yeah.
You know, when you do these hook sets too, and I think that has something to do with it as well.
Yeah, sure. And what it is this: a lot of companies, if they're building a rod right, they should be doing tip hang down tests. So what a tip hang down test is where that rod is completely perpendicular to the ground, and you run line through the guides and you're
put
pulling
like a 5-pound weight or something.
No, it's not straight down. What they're doing is you're running it down to another guide that sits literally right by where the butt is, and then that runs over to, 1 foot away from the butt of the rod. It runs straight down through that guide and then straight out, and then you have a scale or whatever, and you're pulling. And every rod that's worth its salt should have at least, especially for the bass fishing industry, should have at least a 2 kilograms, so like a 4.5 pound tip hang down test, and that's a completely curl, right? So what it is when you reduce the angle of that curve, that rod can withstand a whole lot more weight, right? So if the rod was straight up and down, if the tip's in the water and you're reeling straight up, I mean, you could have 1,000-pound fish and it's not going to break the rod, right? And as you get steeper and steeper and steeper and steeper, the amount of tension that it takes to break that rod is reduced, right? So like if you see a guy like, you know, Fat Cat Newton, he's pulling the truck with his rod, you know, and the rod is, you know, pointed straight at the back end of the truck. I mean, anybody could do that as long as the line doesn't break, right?
Sure.
But it's how close to you, and that's why in a kayak, when that rod is here, your arm is, you know, really tight to your shoulder, and the angle is really steep on that longer rod. So
right.
you're getting a lot more, you know, torsion. That kayak rod would probably do the same thing at the same angle. It's simply that because it's shorter, you're not having to reach the fish. You're not having to lift it as steep, right? You're not having to pull the angles high.
Exactly.
But so I mean, they if I was going to do a kayak type rod, and I don't know if this is the same thing, what I would do is, instead of really changing the mechanics of the rod itself, would be to maybe add with the rod kayak specific, you know, accessories like a lanyard, a Velcro lanyard attachment, you know, something that you could wrap around the butt grip. And then the other thing that really I think makes our rods helpful for that is we have a $65 no questions asked replacement plan. So the rod costs $150, but for $65, if you lose it in the lake, slam it in your car door, you know, roll over it with your trailer, you know, whatever you do, go online, send me an email, I'll give you a code, you can go online and order a new one for $65. So, and then we have a 5-year limited warranty for manufacturer defects.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Very cool, man.
So you basically only paying for the cost of the rod and the price that it takes for us to ship it to you, right? So
yeah. Rod shipping is not cheap.
Yeah,
I know.
No, $20.
I'm interested in that 47. That looks pretty cool. I think like at least on the spinning side for me, like right off the bat.
Yeah. And we're coming out with you know, especially for a lot of beginners, you know, a lot of people, there's still a lot of people out there that don't use bait casters. So that's why we're kind of the number one request that we've had. And we've had some kind of like niche requests for different rods. But the number one request we've had is for like a 7.3 medium heavy spinning rod. So that'll be here. That'll be here in August, mid to late August. So.
Okay. Couple of weeks.
Yeah, cool.
Few weeks.
25th-ish. Probably.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah,
you heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. Well, Will, we appreciate your time, man. This has been a good informative episode. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to this and take notes.
I had no idea how far we were going to go down that
Yeah,
rabbit hole.
dude.
You asked
This
me.
is-
You asked me before we came on if I was out of my comfort zone. I told you I said no. I've done this for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And when I
No,
told
for
you it was
sure.
a long story, I wasn't lying.
No, it's awesome. It's a great story, man. We'll have to have you back on again too, man.
Anytime, Phyllis.
Real quick, where
Sure.
can folks find Doomsday Tackle products, social media, all that good stuff, man?
Best place to go is at Doomsday Tackle on Twitter or Facebook
Okay.
or Instagram. Sorry, we don't really do Twitter, to be honest with you.
I was going to say, like, really? You
I
guys are on Twitter?
don't. Yeah, I don't.
We
do
do
Twitter.
have a Twitter account, but I don't really post on it. And that's
Sure.
simply because Instagram and Facebook, because they're connected, it's so easy. I just post on
Yeah.
Instagram and it goes everywhere that I can go
Yep.
on there. We do have a TikTok. I think there's one video of Dave Mullins catching something on there, but I don't ever post on that either.
Well,
but, yeah.
just be advised. I just saw something come across my screen. President Trump just passed something where TikTok's going to be banned in about 45 days. So I don't know how many people that's going to piss
Yeah, I
off.
saw. So I guess Microsoft's not going to buy it now. Is that what's
I don't
going on?
know.
I don't
We'll
know. I'll
see.
have to check
We'll
it out.
see.
My kids will be upset. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Oh, yeah.
But doomsdaytackle.com. We're actually pretty much 100% online now. If you happen to be up in the Massachusetts area, in Brookfield, Massachusetts, there is one tackle shop, Ben's Tackle Shop. Give him a shout out.
Okay.
And they do sell. So if you're in that, Boston-ish area of Massachusetts, you can get some stuff. But doomsdaytackle.com, all of our stuff is free shipping. So we don't ever charge shipping for anything. That's kind of a new thing that we just started. And
Nice.
yeah, so especially with this, COVID stuff going on, a lot of people started buying things online instead of going to stores. But
Sure.
free shipping on everything. If UPS breaks it, we'll replace it for free. Yeah,
Very cool.
Sweet, man.
I take care of our peoples.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. All right. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks again. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next Thursday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Peace.
Peace. Fish to the end.